Welcome to the Narrator Roundtable. I'm Lindsey. Joining me today is André.
Hey.
Hello, and Kirt.
Hi, Lindsey. I love editing at the start of every episode Andre's greetings because it's something different every time.
Giving us that variety.
Yeah.
When I first started my audiobook narration journey, I got some advice that wasn't great, for me personally, at least. You're already an actor, they said. Just dive in. So I waded into the waters of ACX, splashed around a bit, and realized that I needed help. So I sought out performance coaches and workshop opportunities to adjust my technique for this new medium. Then I wanted to book more traditionally published work. I knew I could email producers directly with a link to my website, but lots of folks told me that the real game changer was FaceTime. You've got to meet people. Run into them in a hallway and have a chat. So I geared up for APAC 2020, ready to be a human in public, and we could no longer be in public, for very good reasons. Now, in 2024, all sorts of narrators, both new and established, find themselves longing for community, connections, and guidance. And there are more options than ever before for those on the hunt. But how do we know which options are worth our time, money, and vulnerability? I'm excited to discuss these questions with today's guest host, Shiromi Arserio. A quick note before we dive in. We will be doing our best during this conversation to avoid naming any specific coaches, either to praise or criticize. Any names that are mentioned or omitted are neither an endorsement or indictment of those people. Instead, we're more interested in discussing broader questions around this topic. Back to talking about our guest host, Shiromi. I've been a Shiromi fan for a while now, both due to her immersive narration and her thoughtful social media presence. She is also a nature nut who loves to travel and dreams of hosting a wildlife-based travel show, which is something I would absolutely watch. Some network needs to give her all the money to do that. Welcome, Shiromi. I am so excited to dive in.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
So excited you're here. So to get right into it, I know that everyone here on the roundtable is a quote-unquote established narrator with years of experience under our belts. So I'm curious, how does everyone here approach continuing education now? Presumably we've moved beyond sort of the basics of audiobook narration. What are your goals when you're signing up for a new coaching session or workshop?
I think for me, I like to go in with specifics. So, I'm at a point where I don't need general coaching, as you said. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking for somebody who can give me something specific. So if I'm looking at, maybe I want to do more stuff in the horror genre, then I would look at a coach who specializes in that genre. That's generally how I approach it. Sometimes, though, it's not necessarily something as tangible as that. Sometimes, if it's just a workshop, it's just because I want to be around people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say community is a big factor for me these days. Sometimes it is wanting to expand a particular skill set, but sometimes it's like, I just want to meet people virtually or otherwise. I want to hear other people read. I want to get a new perspective that I didn't have before.
Yeah, just to echo what Shiromi said, I think one of the reasons I get coaching is because of something specific. So the last thing I did that I'm thinking of is like, I really want to get into, I'm putting this out in the world. I really want to get into short form narration, which paradoxically is also long form journalism. So I want to do that type of work, and I hadn't had any exposure to it because it's a real tough niche to wedge your way into. And so I took a class on it, and I learned a lot. And it was practical advice as well as like style tips on narration and like how it differs from regular narration, and in a lot of ways how it doesn't. And so that was very helpful. But the other way is just kind of like an oil change. It's a tune-up. nothing has to be wrong, and I don't need to be looking for anything specific. It's just even if I walk out of that class and all I got was a pat on the back and a "you're doing great," you need that every now and again.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
like you need every now and again to have somebody you trust, trust enough to pay, to say, yeah, you're still on the right track. You're doing well. I hear your voice. I like what you're doing. Or like, here's a few little things you can do. But even if I walk away and I feel like, wow, I didn't get anything specific out of that, the positive reinforcement that you're on the right track, sometimes that's enough.
I've realized the cycle for me has been this process of identifying. I listen back to a lot of my own work, and I feel like I have a vision in my head, or I guess like what's the brain version for like an audio thing, right? Like I have
You have a
this idea in my
soundtrack in
head
your
of
head. Yeah.
exactly whole orchestra of what I want to sound like in audiobooks. And I have this cycle of like trying to identify in the moment of recording, am I creating the atmosphere? Am I doing what I want with the character voices? And I think identifying where those like weak points come up. And so in that space, I think similarly to Kirt and Shiromi, I come to someone if there's something like recurring. Like for me, I had, I think, like a period of like 6 months where I was really thinking about women's voices in narration and how I approached women's voices. Or it for really early on in narration for me, like third person just kicked my butt all up and down the court. Um, but I think ultimately, like when it comes to thinking about coaches, this idea in my head keeps emerging, especially as I like direct more and watch other people's patterns of mastery. And I think when I identify like what coaches I want, I think about which people I feel strongest, I feel are able to give me the most specific guidance towards this sense of like mastery. Um, and so sometimes that's specific, sometimes that's general and just being exposed to someone and being put in front of a text that I haven't experienced before and just seeing kind of what happens. Um, but I feel like that takes me between one on one coaching or even occasionally taking a class or showing up to an event where I feel like I'm going to be exposed to some kind of training.
Yeah. And similar to Kurt, sometimes, if I'm honest with myself, I am looking for either positive reinforcement or like the feeling like if there is a problem that I fixed it. Because sometimes I get very in my own head and I worry about falling into patterns with my work. And so sometimes I'm just like, I just want a person who sees this text differently than me to give me a new perspective, a new way in. I'm like, there has to be another angle to look at this from because I feel like I'm approaching it from the same direction every time.
Yeah, which is so
Yeah.
great about like being in a group setting, especially if you do the same texts and hear people get to approach the same texts. Because it's like, on one hand, it's like, sure, we can identify these specific things we can grow in. But on the other hand, the power of hearing like multiple approaches to the same thing is, I think, enormous and also freeing.
I also love the group atmosphere when it comes to like getting coaching, because I get so worked up and nervous about being judged, in that even though it's a coaching environment and it is supportive and I can know all of those things intellectually, I'm still freaking the fuck out inside that I'm performing for usually one of my like heroes. Like
Right.
here I am to be critiqued by somebody who I love. um and so it's sometimes hard to learn in that emotional environment for me.
Mm.
And so a group is great because I can do my thing and that can be its own traumatic experience. And then I can sit back and I can watch and learn from other people doing that same thing and hearing the feedback that's going to other people, but at a time when my brain can actually like take it in,
Mhm.
because I'm not
That's
like
interesting.
closed up in fear.
So we've talked about a lot of really great holistic reasons, from finding new perspectives to connecting with community. One thing I haven't heard any of us mention yet is access to people who can hire us. And I'm curious, at this stage in your careers, or if it's changed from an earlier point in your career, how much does that, as one of the many factors, how does that weigh in when you're looking at classes to sign up for?
I'd be lying if I said it didn't weigh in. I mean, I think we all, do that to some degree or another. I'm lucky that I'm at a point in my career where I don't have to do that very often. I don't have to make that choice all the time. But yeah, it's definitely been a thing for me where it still is, I won't lie, where it's like, okay, I don't know this person and I haven't been working with X company much lately, so I'm going to do this workshop just so I can get a little bit of face time. But I think for me, you have to be very realistic about, what you're doing when you go into that kind of a situation. Be honest with yourself about why you're doing it. And also just understand that, as Kirt said, it's not a great situation to be in as a performer. It's very completely the opposite of what we do, on a day-to-day basis where we're mostly recording alone or with one or two other people listening in. So be honest with yourself. You're probably not going to be the person that's gonna get a book from this casting director next week. It's the start of a relationship. And it could take a year or two before you actually get a book, but at least it gets you in the door.
It was really hard for me because when I did an event early on where I had one-on-one time with a producer, that person sent me a book within a couple of weeks. And so there was this kind of recurring thing in my head where whenever I attended anything, the cost was matched 1-1 next to how many books I could track as having come from the people I met at that event. And it was hard not to frame it as a like on one hand, I'm like, I know that I'm arriving in this space where I'm going to be exposed to this person, and then the rest has to match up. It's not like they're going to just send me a book because I paid to be somewhere. Like the right book has to be present for them to send to me. But I think I agree, Shiromi. I feel like it's so hard to have this framework of like, this experience is going to be worth it because I'm going to be put in front of producers who might be able to hire me, but also not feel this sense of like, um, being owed something, if that makes sense too, because I think everyone who arrives at an event is going to be at a different place in their career. And so, like, can we actually all have the same narrative about what the point of being here is if we don't all walk into it with the same experience and walk out of it with the same experience, right?
When I was prepping for this episode, I had to really go back and like scrutinize my decision making and looking at all of the things and classes that I had taken to answer this question. And I can honestly say that I have never taken a class for access. I've never taken a class with somebody who could hire me. So, if maybe somewhere in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, this person could maybe recommend me for something if they were ever asked. But nobody I've ever worked with had the power to cast me.
Yeah.
And so that was not a factor in deciding whether or not I was going to pay for instruction.
Mm-hmm.
But I know the types of classes that I think that is a motivation. I simply haven't been motivated, and mostly it's because of the money. I don't think it's a mistake that those things seem to cost more money when it seems like you're also getting access.
No, that's a good point, that like you're paying, because of course, like generally the people who hire us are very immersed in their work. They're very passionate about their work. They're casting people and listening to audiobooks all day. So of course, those people have insights to offer us. It's not, like there's knowledge to be gained there alongside any sort of access. And even if that person never hires you, you can walk away with some insight into the industry or casting in general, or what the newest trend in audiobooks is that like is going to help you perform better and maybe get other books.
Right. And I'm definitely not saying that like I did it the right way, because I am also still like scratching and scraping and clawing my way in front of publishers. So like maybe I should have paid for some access. I don't know. But I can honestly say I looked back and I was like, oh, I guess that was not a thing I was doing. That I was not thinking that strategically.
Yeah. It's definitely been a solid factor for me as I've been looking at stuff. I think because like living in Chicago, I don't have a ton of like natural access to these people. Like there aren't that many like social events where I could just bump into them and say hi. And even when I do go in studio locally in Chicago, everybody's coming in remote. Like I'm not like bumping into a producer in the hallway. So part of me has been like, okay, if I want these people to like see my face and know that I'm a human, then like I need to do some of these. And it's interesting because there are a couple of those opportunities that I've signed up for and taken that have been really valuable, either in finding more work or learning something new and getting some really quality coaching, or both. But I will say a solid chunk of those experiences have been like kind of disappointing. And maybe because like I didn't go in with the right viewpoint, because maybe I was going in like, you know, there, I don't know. I feel like it brings it some chip on my shoulder personally to be like, I'm paying just to like see you. But of course, these people work 9-to-5 jobs and they work very hard and they aren't paid the big bucks. And like they should be paid for their time outside of work. So it's a weird, complicated feeling. Yeah, for me at least.
I think it's like Shiromi said, like, I don't know that there is a real grounded mindset about this. Like it's really, really hard for me to go from like seeing Facebook posts where people are talking about like their work is disappearing and they're having trouble finding, connecting with people and then seeing people come to things that are often really expensive in the hopes of making that up. And then also having this narrative about connecting with producers, and I don't mean to say narrative like I dismiss it, like I think it's real, that producers are people. They are people in their own lived context. But like the combination of all these things creates this like Rubik's cube of like moral questions and implications and like that are so far removed from like what we actually do as audiobook narrators. And it's really hard to have some kind of like I said, like I don't think we could share a narrative if we all have different experiences and then show up at the same event where we've basically paid to be in front of someone.
I guess like Lindsey, I don't live in a metropolis. I don't even live in a metropolis like Chicago, where she is, So maybe that's part of like why my brain doesn't go to access, because it's something I just don't assume I have. But you do every once in a while, including tonight, hear a story about how somebody goes to one of these classes and gets a job from it a few weeks later. So like, it can happen. And like, that's just enough of a carrot to motivate, to seek that return on investment. Hopefully knowing. And I guess that's where I worry is like, I hope people know that the chance that will happen for you is not 100%. It's probably closer to 10% or less. So if it's worth it, do it, pursue it. Know that you will get other things out of it. But I worry that there are people who feel like they are paying for access and not getting what they paid for. Am I crazy for thinking that's happening?
No, I can absolutely affirm that is 100% happening.
And I get why people can feel that way. And it, like I said, it's a weird thing to walk to because there is some bump to it, right? Just by being like, this is my face. Even though we're communicating through a screen, like I am connecting with you. I have your undivided attention for 2 or 3 minutes or longer, depending on how long, depending on if it's a group setting or a one-on-one. And that is making some impression in your brain somewhere that maybe like a faceless email is not making the same impression. And that's not to say that that's going to like go into the like gotcha machine and come out with a book, but there is something to be said about like, because I often think like part of my job with casting people is keeping myself enough in their mental Rolodex that when a project comes up that I'm right for, I am in their brain somewhere. I'm sitting on my little stool in the corner going, hello, I'm here in their little brain stool. And if I haven't connected with them in a long time or they've never seen my face, like the chances of them looking over and seeing me there in the corner doing this, I'm waving for the audio only people, is lower, I think.
It's tough. And
It is.
there are just so many narrators now. And, all of us, whether, you're new to the industry or have been in it for a number of years, are struggling to remain relevant, to be like waving, hi, I'm still here. So I definitely understand the feeling of going in to a workshop or one-on-one with a casting director with the hopes that, they'll remember me.
And it's not just casting directors either, because I do see like other people, oftentimes people who aren't even successful narrators themselves, offering courses on how to be successful narrators.
That's a great segue, Kirt, because I'm really curious about what you folks, as experienced established narrators, look when you're looking for a new coaching opportunity, whether for access or not. What are some like red flags you look for? What are some things that make you go, not whether it's, and I'm curious whether it's like for you personally or whether it's stuff that you would tell like another narrator, like I would avoid it because of X.
Read English? Do you want to make $400 an hour?
No, that's a good one right off the bat.
You do want somebody who has experience. I mean, I've definitely seen it. Somebody that's done like 10 or even 20 audiobooks. And they're coaching. And sometimes, I try to give like the person the benefit of the doubt and be like, well, maybe most of their audiobooks are under their pseudonym. But you would think if you're coaching that you would then give your pseudonym out and be coaching under your pseudonym, because
or at least state narrated, over 100 audiobooks under multiple names, so that when you do, because I do the same thing. Like when I see people offering coaching, I'm like, and I've never heard their name. I mean, I don't know everybody in our industry, but I've seen a lot of names in the last, 10 years. So I'm Googling if I see a name that I don't know and they're offering coaching, and I'm like, who is this person and what have they done?
Yeah. One thing this is not like a red flag, but something that I found is less valuable for me personally. And now I think about when I'm looking for stuff is like, I need there to be a certain amount of time, whether it's, this doesn't apply if it's one-on-one, but if it's a group class, I need there to be a certain amount of time per student to dive in. And there's different lengths of that. Different coaching workshops have different approaches to that. But for me, I need at least enough time for each person to like read, get feedback, and then implement that feedback. Because I found for me personally, the times that I've been in a workshop where I read, maybe get some very brief feedback, and then they move on to the next person, I find that like a very unsatisfying experience for me. And I found like the couple times I've participated in workshops like that, I've been like, even watching other people do that without getting to see them then apply that in real time and like grow in front of me, I just feel like I'm not really getting any satisfaction out of it, either performing or watching.
Yeah. I've had this was actually out like in other genres of VO, but I have been in a casting director group session where the casting director does cast a lot of like high paying, like high, publicity or high profile projects. But the other piece of it was that the casting director was not a strong teacher. And so I would read, or someone whose read they didn't love would come up, and then we'd get extremely vague feedback. And then when someone whose read they did like came up, they would just be like, the most specific thing they would like compliment would be like, oh my God, that's it. Like, that's what I'm looking for. No breakdown of, right, there's no kind of like training session. Their background isn't in acting, so they're not even speaking to us in that language. We're getting all the same vague things about you're talking to a friend, make it conversational, whatever. But the language isn't there, and you walk away feeling like I've actually learned nothing about really what it is you prefer from deliveries in this genre.
That is such a good point, because teaching is a very specific talent. And I've been in enough classes, studios, to see that like some people naturally are just fantastic at finding a way to communicate what they need to communicate to a student so that the student hears them. Because we all learn differently as well. So the best teachers I've worked with have been the ones who don't give up if they're not understood the first time. They try a different tack. They say it another way. They ask questions. So like that's not a red flag, that's a green flag. I look for great teachers like that. But a red flag would be one who just can't communicate. Even if they know what they're thinking, they can't say it in a way that makes sense to the student.
No.
I was also going to say the other red flag for me is anybody, and I want to be careful how I say this because I don't want to denigrate, but anybody who's like selling a system. Because I believe so strongly that like what we do is not universal. We all have our individual styles and voices and backgrounds. And I think the most effective coaching happens when, again, the teacher can identify who the student is and what their strengths are and can work to that. But that is not a universal system.
Well, I wonder then, like, I feel like that also creates a negative effect potentially for those students in terms of like their uniformity, that if like they're taught how to write emails the same way, or they're taught to reach out in a specific cadence, or they're taught to like put, and it's not just like, hey, here are some tried and true things that are sort of universal, like don't write an email and be like, hey, jerk face, like, whatever. But the things that
they'll remember you.
If that's your brand, if your brand is calling people jerk face, it's my new brand, you guys. But like there are universal things that you can say for everything. But beyond those, like, because I feel like sometimes I see people using the same templates over and over again, whether it's for their branding or their reach outs or like how they talk about themselves or even how they approach work, that like feels like, oh, I'm kind of seeing the same thing over and over again. And that's less interesting to me as like, as somebody who, is looking at all this stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. I see that with in voiceover with like demos and stuff. There are certain companies that like put out a bunch of demos and you know exactly what you're getting when you listen to a demo by this person. But yeah, that's very true.
Well, and to play my own devil's advocate there, sometimes it's also nice to know that person's consistent, because if you really like what they do and your hope is that they can teach you to do what they do, then, that's an expectation that can be met. But I think that that's something you have to establish right away. So maybe if you're looking for a coach and you're going to someone specifically because you like what they do, ask before you take a class, like, what is your method?
Yeah.
Like, will you teach me how to be more like you, or will you teach me to be more like me?
And I think that's been, I was going to say two deciding factors. I think that's been one of my deciding factors is like, is this the kind of person, if they have a system who, when you get to the point of like that one-on-one work where they're like, nope, this is how you do it. This has always been the same. The people who still think you need to do 60 audiobooks before you reach out to a publisher, versus the ones who are encouraging you to follow your instincts or adapt with new information you've learned or all those other pieces. The other piece, and this ties back to what we said earlier about like credentials and like people who are really early on coaching. The times where I have made exceptions for someone who might not have super strong credentials are when they are a really, like, clearly a really strong teacher, or all the one-on-one feedback I've heard from them, not feedback posted on their website, because I have been misrepresented in that way before. But one-on-one information, like I reach out to Lindsey and Lindsey's like, yeah, they're working with them is great. Or they bring a lot of specific experience from another space and they're coaching around that skill. Right.
It's not all set in stone. I will say though one thing. I would, if the coach is a narrator, and I see this more with voiceover specifically than with narrators per se, but I'd also want to know, like, is this person still narrating? When was the last book they did? Was it like 5 years ago? In which case, are they still up on, the trends and just, everything's changing at a rapid pace. So you want somebody who knows their stuff now.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Well, and you can achieve that too just by listening to what their work is. Like because that can happen even if they are consistently narrating. Like, we know that sometimes success breeds success. So if you are already the name, you're going to keep getting work regardless of whether or not you've changed or evolved over time, and that person to me is more likely to teach like the way that doesn't work for me. It's not good or bad. It just doesn't work for me to have like a strict set of like, you end a sentence like this. If it's the end of the chapter, you make sure to say it like that. Like anything that has that kind of strict rule structure, that doesn't speak to me as a creative individual. And I can usually hear that in somebody's narration.
Yeah. And I will say, when I was very, 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 very early on in my exploration of audiobook narration and was like looking for coaches, I made the mistake that's so silly to me now in retrospect, but I didn't, when I was like looking for coaches, I just went off who like somebody told me was good. I never went and listened to that person's samples. And which is such an important thing because it's like, and then later I went back and listened. I was like, I don't even like how they narrate in a subjective way, right? Like I'm not calling anybody a bad narrator, but I was like, oh, I don't like their style. Why do I want somebody who narrates in a style that doesn't connect with me to teach me how to narrate? But that didn't even occur to me. I was just like, people say this person is good, so I'm going to go learn from them. And, and they are good to, it's not a good or bad thing, but it's like, oh, maybe I should only study with people who like narrate in a way that resonates with me personally.
And to keep pushing on this idea, like I've coached with people whose narration isn't necessarily my favorite because they're phenomenal teachers and they focus on what you're aiming for. They're not trying to coach you into reading the way they read.
Yeah, Shiromi, I'm curious because before, when we were first talking about getting ready for this episode, you mentioned that you sort of jumped into the industry without doing a ton of coaching up front and then like retroactively sort of went back and did a little bit when you were a little further along. And I'm really curious about what that experience was like and what you learned from it.
Yeah, I don't know how true that was, but I know that you see on the forums, somebody's like, oh, I want to get an audiobook narration. Everybody's like, coaching. And, I didn't do a lot of the one-on-one stuff or any. Any? Yeah. I did like some workshops. I did I'm a big self-studier, so I was listening to a lot of audiobooks. I was absorbing as much information as there was out there in 2013, 2014. And yeah, I probably didn't go into one-on-one coaching with the, nowadays, like I said, I want to be specific, but then I just kind of felt like a fraud. It was so dumb. It was like 2018 at that point, 2019 maybe. I was already working with publishers, but I kind of just felt a little imposter syndrome. I did actually do other one-on-one coaching. It's so weird that I didn't even think of that as being a form of audiobook coaching, but it was more character specific for audiobooks, which was great. But I still felt like I hadn't done what everybody else was saying you had to do, which was, you had to get like a bunch of coaching and learn how to, speak like an audiobook narrator and work the mic like an audiobook narrator. Even then, I went with somebody, I guess I did go a little bit specific because I went with somebody who was narrating in my genres, the genres that I wanted to, excel in. So that was helpful. And it was also very helpful to get that reassurance. It helped my little imposter syndrome to be told, okay, I am on the right track. Because apparently getting publisher work wasn't doing it. But it was what I needed at the time.
Well, and it's amazing too, the things that can click for you just because someone else said it. Even if you were already doing it, you didn't know what you were doing. And so building up that vocabulary and that language is so helpful moving forward because it is a method by which you can internally build yourself up, remind yourself of what you know and how to do things when you do feel a little bit lost. Those days in the booth when you're like, am I good at this? Why did they hire me for this book? I'm so bad. And then you can remind yourself like, okay, no, this is what you have been told. This is what you see in your work. Do that. Even if you can't connect to it and you can't feel great about it, just do that thing. That is the bare minimum of your job of narrating. Do these things well that you've been told you do well. But you have to hear it to know it, to identify it.
I really have to like, and maybe this is the on-ramp to like flipping the table in this conversation, but I really have to like zero into, Kirt, on what you just mentioned about this lack of confidence, or even Shiromi, what you said about like this imposter syndrome too. And I feel like you can't understate the relationship between a, a red flag filled program that people will pay for and the things that people feel like concerned or lacking confidence in. I think that they go hand in hand, right? That the people who find themselves in something that like they probably really shouldn't be paying for with someone who probably doesn't have their best interest in mind, those pairings are more likely to happen when someone is really lacking confidence in something. I want to share an experience I had in part because, if I share this, if this person ever hears this, they'll know exactly who they are, not to encourage anyone else to dig up and try to find out who this person was. But there was a like free workshop that was presented to me really early on. And of course, like the point of all these free workshops is to kind of get students in front of the teacher, get a sense of, oh, I like working with this person and encourage them to take more classes. Went in with the understanding of that. That's often what the framework is. And that makes sense to me. I don't think I have a problem with that. The free workshop, before I took it, I went and looked up all the reviews and I was like, oh my God, like, look at these names, like giving this person a thumbs up. I was like, oh, these people have done the kinds of things that I want to do. Like, let me jump into this experience. The workshop was questionable in terms of quality in a lot of ways. Additionally, there were some parts of the workshop that were just like straight up, explicitly said by name, stolen content from another really famous kind of like voiceover training thing. So after the free workshop, I was like, great. I know that I am not really interested in working with this person. When I got my Audie nomination, I was tagged in a post by this coach saying, my student, André Santana, has been nominated. And I was like, oh, I see where all of these, they had messaged me afterwards and they were like, oh, can you give me some like a testimonial? And I'm non-confrontational. And, I was like, sure, I wrote out a quick thing and that got posted online pretty quickly. And it happened twice. And it got to the point where I was like, because for me, the classes I recommend and the coaches I recommend are an extension of like my moral compass and my integrity. And I was like, I really am actually not comfortable with this. Could you please take down these posts that like of me, like, sponsoring you or not sponsoring, like giving you the thumbs up.
Endorsing.
Thank you. Exactly. And so that was a really difficult conversation for me to have with that person. Even coaches that I love working with, because it is a really common system to get people to recommend you, even coaches I love working with have kickback programs where, if I recommend Kirt, then maybe I'll get a discount on a coaching session or something. And I don't hold that against them. Again, it is another marketing tactic. There's all these marketing tactics. I personally have never felt comfortable using a kickback program. Of all the people I've recommended to coaches and classes that I like, I've never taken the kickback program. The people who are lacking confidence or needing work or really like, needing something to come back out of the void for them in this space, matched up with the kind of like absolutist language of like, this course is guaranteed, or like this person can get you in front of the right people, or all of that kind of language that I think comes up sometimes because of just like standard marketing techniques gone left, or like standard marketing techniques with maybe a little less integrity than they should have, versus the very small but existent group of people who are like creating an experience, a system that they know lacks integrity, and they intend for it to lack integrity because that's what's going to bring in the students or bring in the money. So it's yeah, it is a hard ecosystem to navigate, particularly when you're struggling and being told these classes and these coaches are the way that you move forward.
Good for you. Good job having that tough conversation. Good for you.
Yeah, that's why I said something in my intro about not just our time and our money, but our vulnerability we bring to these coaches. Because also, like, 9 times out of 10, if I'm seeking out a coaching session, it's because I'm feeling insecure about something, whether it's my performance, whether it's my schedule, and like how much work I have booked out. Like, at least on some level, it's about me being like, something's not working right and I want to fix it. And there might be other factors too, like we talked about at the beginning with, I want to meet more people, or I want a new perspective, or I think this would be interesting. But like, for me, there's very frequently that undercurrent of like fear and and I'm like bringing that vulnerability to this person and trusting that they will at least have my best interest at heart enough to like give me what they believe is good feedback, is helpful feedback, will lead me in a direction that they believe is helpful. Yeah, but it can be a scary thing, for sure.
And I like too, André, the way you separated out the very small group of people who, I'll say it, are maliciously preying on people who know nothing in order to make money, and the vast majority of people who have good intentions, but may not be right for all people, and are following that advertising lingo of like guaranteed or like discount or like all those things that we see being marketed to us all the time that still trick us, regardless of how long we've been around and how many times we've seen that fail. Like, nothing's guaranteed. Nothing ever is guaranteed. But there's so much hope that gets preyed upon in any industry, in any consulting industry, in any coaching industry. Coaching can be a really fraught experience. There's a podcast called The Dream that I love. Their whole 3rd season was about coaching. Because it takes no qualifications to be a coach. So proceed with caution. Always, on everything. But especially if somebody's promising they can get you work.
Yeah, and I wonder about the coaches who see the same people come back again and again and again and again. And my hope that those people like treat that relationship with integrity. Because sometimes I worry when I see like, and not to say that like we shouldn't have our favorite coaches that really like, man, I need a tune up. I'm going to so-and-so because I know they always like get me. They always see just what I need. And like, I think that's wonderful. But I also feel like sometimes I see people and I feel like, and I can feel, I say this because I myself can feel the pull of that vortex as a lifelong student, as a lifelong like overachiever nerd type who likes rules and structure and who likes like, did I get an A+? So like, I can feel that pull as somebody who like seeks validation in classroom settings to like keep coming back and keep getting, like, but then also I have to be really strict with myself and be like, what do you actually need out of this experience? Is that like, and is the return on investment? Because no matter who you're coaching with, it's going to cost money, it's going to cost time, and it's going to cost vulnerability. Is it worth it? Is the return on investment worth it? And I know I have to ask myself that every time, and it can be a complicated calculation.
Well, I think what you're getting to there is like sometimes what we are looking for is comfort. And you can get comfortable with a teacher. You can know what you need to do to get positive feedback from somebody. And that's not wrong. Sometimes that might be what you need. But we, as consumers, as students, have to identify when it's time to get uncomfortable and to seek out something new and different.
Yeah, Shiromi, what has been some of your when you think back on like some of your best coaching experiences, what have been the factors that have led to like a really good either workshop or one-on-one experience for you?
Well, of recency, my most recent workshop was the one that I really loved because it's what I needed at the time. And that changes depending on where you are in your career or in your life or whatnot. What I needed at the time was to be around narrators. And that was my first in-person workshop since the pandemic. So it was small. It was very small, very intimate. I really got to know the narrators there and the coaches. And because it was small too, there was a lot more time. You were talking about how some of these workshops can be like you get your 3 minutes and you do it and you don't even get to do it again. But because it was so small, we got to see the people around us grow as narrators, and that was special.
Yeah, I find in like I said, group settings, seeing that growth is like, I don't know, helps me unlock something a lot of times. And also like brings you closer to those other narrators. Like as fellow artists, helps you, like gives you a glimpse into how they work and how their brain works and how they like move as an artist. And then you're like, that's my new friend. We're friends now.
And I also love group settings when you get a chance to, and I suppose this can go both ways, but for the most part, I've had very good experiences when you get feedback from other people, from your peers, in a controlled environment where there is a teacher present who's guiding the feedback. Because I'm not saying I'm looking for people to email me with their thoughts on every book I've ever done. That's not what I'm seeking. But in that sort of environment, to have like the instructor give some feedback and then to hear from some other people like, oh, I really liked this, or like, oh, I didn't hear this. I'm just wondering, did I miss, like in a respectful and constructive way, like hearing your peers and getting to offer your peers, having more voices. Because again, going back to that thing that we all learn things differently, having more voices, more vocabularies in the room to help you find the thing that you can walk away with and be like, oh, that was so valuable. It doesn't always come from the instructor. Sometimes that super valuable piece of feedback that clicks with you comes from one of the other people in the group.
Last year, someone gave me a piece of feedback that I think applies in a lot of contexts to someone you really want to meet or someone you really want FaceTime who you think you can move, who you think can move your career forward. Which was essentially like, be a farmer, not a hunter, right? Like, don't like the person you want to talk to is talking to someone else and you're just kind of like standing there like a statue, like half shaded in darkness, like waiting for them to finish. um as opposed to like you nurture the relationship, you water it a little bit. Sometimes there's drought, sometimes they're rainy. So you find an opportunity to connect with them, you take it, you keep it interpersonal, you keep it human, not like a like, oh my god, what can you get me right now, and you follow kind of the rules with it. And I think with that advice, even when I go to an event where, like, let's say you get that one on one time in like a structured way, like it's scheduled somehow, sure, I'll take that one on one time. And if we run into each other, we'll chat, we'll say hi, we'll develop that relationship. But I much prefer now when I'm at events to spend my time with narrators in kind of the spirit of this podcast. Like, I learn about our careers, our approaches. I'm learning so much, you know what I mean? Like, another narrator is going to tell me about how they manage their relationships with clients or how they approach a certain thing, maybe more intricately than like a producer who doesn't live those experiences could tell me. Like, I feel like that has been one, like such a stress reliever of not like waiting around being like, when am I going to catch this next person or get in front of them? And two, like, we do get a lot of opportunities to recommend each other. It's not like it's a non-zero approach to like quote unquote finding work, but I would just rather be as human as possible in those spaces and connect with the people who I'm going to relate to most in those spaces, which isn't always necessarily a producer. And I think it can be stressful for them to go somewhere where there are 100 people who all want to talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
Stressful for them and stressful for some of us. I'm so bad in that environment.
Me too, 100%. Yeah, I'm definitely about connecting with narrators and, if a casting director shows up, great.
But that does
But I'm
happen.
not, but it does
You
happen.
know,
Yeah,
like sometimes
exactly.
you're having a great conversation and you look like you're having a good time, and suddenly like in walks somebody that can give you work, and you're like, oh my God, okay. They approached us. Like, that's fun.
Well, and in fact, it's interesting because for all that, like, I realized recently that I've had a shift in that sort of like looking for access and coaching thing. Cause it was, like I mentioned before, it was a big factor for me at one point. And now it's less of one. And part of that is the privilege of like, I've at least established some connection with a lot of these people. Even if they've never given me a job, at least they've like returned an email or like, you know, I've liked their post on Instagram and they've been like, cool or whatever, you know, like I'm like, cool. They know I exist, you know, even if that we've never worked together. To the point that I recently signed up for a workshop that I was really excited about. And that workshop featured some like casting people that you could meet. And when I saw that on the workshop, I was like, I actually don't care. Like, I'm excited about the content that this instructor is going to be telling me. And like, if those people weren't there, it would not affect my decision at all. And in fact, to the point where like, I later learned that like the workshop was a little bit different than I anticipated it would be when I got the syllabus. Still a really valuable, cool experience, just not the one I wanted to spend my money on. And I reached out to the person and said, this looks really cool. I misunderstood what the course was. I think you have a waiting list. You're good to like switch someone out. And they were very nice about it. We're like, yes. So to the point where like when the content wasn't what I was excited about anymore, I was like, actually, I'm going to save my dollars for like content that I am excited about.
And you never know who's going to make the introduction.
Yeah.
Because and again, this is not universal. It's only happened to me once. But like last year before APAC, the last in-person APAC 2023, I took a class, and one of the instructors of that class found me at APAC very randomly. We weren't seeking each other out. It was just like, oh, hey, hi, how are you? And just started introducing me to people who cast.
Mm-hmm.
And I got cards that I otherwise wouldn't have gotten. Have I gotten any jobs from those people yet? No, but that's okay. They're on my mailing list now. I reach out every now and again, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But if I had saved my money for a class where I knew I was going to get in front of somebody who could cast me, that experience wouldn't have happened because it took another narrator to do that. And so it's just another thing about like how important it is to network with narrators, because you never know when they're going to grab you by the elbow and say, come over here and meet so-and-so.
I find myself more and more, I think I have a privilege unique in this room, which is I'm in New York and I work a lot in studio. And so I do end up like bumping into producers when I'm at work or like seeing people in that space. Like just recently, I had to turn down a project. It didn't fit into my schedule. And the producer asked for any recommendations of other people. And I sent along like a list of names of people who could be good for the project. And I coach, and I'm in a space now in my career where I coach. That being said, I think like for me, it is a point of integrity that every inch of what I create as a coach is about the skills. I would never, ever, ever suggest to anyone that working with me is an opportunity to like be put forward elsewhere, right? I feel like I don't know where the questions like that come from for everybody who is coaching. And I don't think there is a checklist somewhere where someone is going to like run through all the things they're doing. And similarly, like I shared before, like there are contexts where I don't get to decide the price of the thing that I've been asked to come in and do, or like all these pieces. But I feel like we have to ask these questions as well, right? We have to, whenever we find ourselves in that space, because I think everyone in this room has at some point been in the context of like recommending someone for something. And I don't know how you all approach this, but I think we all also get asked like, oh, like I want to start out in audiobooks. Like, you know, would you mind sitting down with me and like doing a one-on-one thing? And you ask yourself that question of like, how do I approach this? What is it? What is the degree to which I want to approach this question? That being said, I do have a question for the room because I think all of this makes me think about the, pardon my French, the hellscape in the rest of VO where people are charging 2,100, 2,500, 2,700 for a demo, like for, you know, all these things. And I always ask myself, like, who sets the precedent for those prices? Like, at what point do you identify that something is too expensive. I would be shaking in my boots 24/7 if we had like produced demos in the same way in audiobooks and we had to be like we were essentially expected to shell out those prices to get access to agents who give us access to work. God bless audiobooks, right? Like where's my national anthem and my flag? But I'm curious in the audiobook space how y'all look at an opportunity or a coach or a class or whatever and decide it's too expensive. And not just like for you and your budget, but like as an experience is too expensive.
I think it goes back to what Lindsey said about how much time am I getting individually? Because there is a number that if I am one of 12, 16, 20 people, 40, 50 sometimes, these courses can be. And I know that means I'm getting 10 minutes, 15 minutes, even 20 minutes, and it's exceeding a certain threshold of hundreds of dollars. I just don't think I can get anything out of that that's going to be worth that much money. When I know there are opportunities over here that I enjoy that are less money and I get more time to myself. If I can get 2 to 3 hours of coaching for what I could get for one group class of like one-on-one coaching, I'm probably not taking that group class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree with that. André, I really hope you're right and that things stay this way in audiobooks. As somebody that's like been around for 10 years, I've definitely seen things change as far as like, oh, okay, now we're actually like doing, directed demos and stuff like that, samples and things like that. I'm a little afraid that it might be changing, but I don't know. But yeah, it's I don't know. I don't know that I have a specific way of looking at it. I'll look at the number. There's a lot of factors, especially if it's a workshop. Am I going to have to fly to the East Coast to do this? How much have I already been traveling? What else is my business budget committed to this year? It just might not be in the cards in general, but yeah, the things that, like I said, it always goes back to the narrators for me. Yeah, I want to spend time with narrators, and so sometimes I'll see like a workshop, and I'm like, oh God, so and so is going to be there, and I really want to catch up with her in person, so I should go. But yeah, as far as it really varies. I mean, yeah, I should definitely think of it in terms of. I don't know about you guys. Do you guys just price everything in terms of like per finished hour? You're like, okay, this workshop's going to cost me like 4 finished hours.
That's what I meant earlier about like one-wanting events is like, oh, it's this much. Like maybe that's about like 8 finished hours. Like that's what I want to, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. How many hours am I spending in the booth to like pay for this experience? And does that trade-off feel fair to me or worth it to me based on my goals at any given point?
Exactly. I try to look at what is the workshop offering? Is it what I need? I mean, there's a ton, Lord knows there's so many workshops right now. But, it might not necessarily be the right thing for where you are in your career.
Yeah. And the proliferation of workshops, I was thinking about this the other day, is sort of this like, has good and bad aspects to it. The bad being that sometimes it feels overwhelming. And also sometimes you see more and more people being like guaranteed, like André's talking about guaranteed to get work. I'm going to make all your dreams come true. Just read children's books for $400 an hour. Like there's the extreme examples that are proliferating, but also it's been refreshing to see more variety in the types of people who are coaching, the people who are at different points in their career, who have different perspectives. One thing I will say is that like, there have been times that I have gone to workshops or learned from people who were highly recommended for good reason because they're talented narrators and they're experienced and they might even be good teachers. But when that person's career trajectory was so different from mine, especially when it comes to like business coaching stuff, which we haven't super touched on. But when it's like, oh, this is a white dude who's been in the industry for like 15 years longer than me and has a very different, the things that he tells me about like how he got into the business or what works for him or how he gets cast or like, you know, even though he probably has a lot of insight into like narration in general and might be a good performance coach, when it comes to like the broader aspects of like, how do you approach this as a career? It's like, cool. I don't know if those things are going to work for me now, 15 years later, in a different environment and like a different gender, you know, like my experience is going to be different. And I think going into that really clear eyed, being, you know, and, you know, it might also be part of your equation where like, yeah, but they're such an amazing performer and they're such a great teacher that and I want to learn about performance. It's going to be a good fit for me. But I think it's worth like taking those demographics into account when you're looking for coaches who might be a good fit for you personally.
Yeah, this is making me think of the like literalmasterclass.com class about voice acting, which I will name specifically because this was very public and I think everyone responded the exact same way, where the person who did this masterclass was talking about animation and how you break into animation. And they were like, yeah, just go into your closet and like record a quick demo on your phone and then take it around and show it to agents. And I think everyone who heard that had like just the most visceral reaction because that's just blatantly not how it works in that space and it hasn't been for like 10 to 15 years. So that being said, I do want to put this on the record because Shiromi brought it up that I think if you want to get the best out of your demos and you decide you want to bring in a director and an engineer and you want to do like an hour session, you're like, that's going to help me elevate my work and that's how I'm going to make my samples. I love that for you. The day someone says to me like, oh, your sample like needs to be produced, like, or you need to pay someone to like put, you know what I mean? Or like, I swear to God, someone is going to try to do a multicast demo, like a full, you know, like a full production demo. And they're going to be like, yeah, pay me $2,000 to put some music and a couple other voices in here. So, but I will yell. I will yell. I think like that is one thing I would love to never see in audiobooks ever, ever.
Before we wrap up, we've talked a lot about all of the valuable resources that you can pay for today. But we've also talked about how people learn in different ways. Sometimes that self-teaching is more effective for a lot of folks. What are some online resources or free resources that you would recommend or things that you look for in a free resource about audiobooks when you're finding like content on YouTube or on the World Wide Web?
I think a lot of it's the same because you have to look for the people who have the experience, who seem invested in giving you what you need to succeed, not teaching them how to be them. And a part of it is always going to be just like how much you take in. Like, never believe the first thing you see. You know, if you watch one video that says do X, don't do X until you've watched 20 videos and 19 of them say do X, you know? Like you have to, in the world of social media, you have to take in a really broad spectrum because you can fall into some traps if you listen to the first person online to say, I'm a professional audiobook narrator, and this is what I've learned about whatever, you know? Because sometimes those people saying that are extremely qualified, and you are so lucky that they're giving away these thoughts for free. Other times, they are people who are just marketing themselves as experts to get more work. And they might have a little bit of experience and knowledge, but sometimes that's more dangerous than somebody who knows nothing.
I feel like my favorite free resource is audiobooks. I'm such an audiobook fan, and that's all I do all the time is just listen to audiobooks. Oh my God, like don't call the FBI. Like I have learned so much recently from a couple of like specific author reads that I've listened to, even gasp. Like, you know,
What?
it's not to say that like I listen to things and I think what it is, I said this word like mastery, right? And what I mean by that is like I do have a specific again, I need to come up with a word that means like vision, but audio in my head. I do have this specific idea of like what I want to achieve and sound like when I narrate. And I think that like you said, Kirt, this exposure, this breadth of exposure and this exposure to like language, like the tools, all these tools gets you closer. And I think that vision of what it is that you want to achieve and being guided by that is really important, because if you have no sense of like who you are, I see this a lot. You're going to go and coach with Kirt, and Kirt's going to say, do this. And then you're going to go and coach with Lindsey, and Lindsey's going to say, no, do that. And you're going to be stuck like, well, someone else told me to do this, and you told me to do that. And the way you choose is which one helps you get to your vision. And I think that's also how people like navigate working with coaches too, is who's helping you do that. I love, just listening. And I guess technically listening to audiobooks isn't free in most ways, but even the things.
But libraries exist.
I take it back. Boom! I take it back. You're right, Lindsey. Go get your
on
library
Libby.
card.
That's how I listen to most of mine.
This episode's been spot. No, I can't say that. It's not real. It's not true.
But reach out, Libby.
Hey, girl. But I really do love exposure in that way. And I'll name it specifically because I think this is a fascinating video. But really early on YouTube, there are just a handful of like classes and videos and people narrating, like clips of narration or people talking about narrating on YouTube. I watched this video of Barbara Rosenblatt coaching someone, and it's fascinating because even looking back, like the thing that she coached that person to, that's not how I narrate. But watching her use that specific language and then watching that narrator like immediately make the adjustments that she suggested was, I think, like world bending around like what is the coaching relationship? What is the like coachee relationship? Because I've also been in group sessions where someone gives someone else a direction, like a coach gives a direction for change. The person doesn't make the change and the coach is like, great, and then moves on. So like even getting an understanding of like the shifts and the subtle shifts, I think is super impactful for how you assess coaching.
Yeah, no, I also stumbled upon that Barbara Rosenblatt video when I was just like noodling around on YouTube, and I was like, this is amazing. This woman is brilliant. So,
well, because there was a time when if you searched like audiobook narration on YouTube, you got like 6 results. And now it's like 1 million. There's so many more people online telling you how to do this work.
Yeah, it's really hard to just sift through it all. But yeah, I didn't even think of YouTube, but that actually is really good. There are some really good people showing samples of their coaching on there. Yeah, I struggled with this one because I feel genuinely bad for people that are starting out now, because there's just, 10 years ago, there was way less stuff, but it was at least, you knew where you were able to find this stuff, and you could sort through it a little bit easier. Now there's just so much. It's a bit of a cheat because neither PANA nor the APA are free. You have to be members. But there is a ton of good information there. And certainly if you're looking at becoming an audiobook narrator, I would certainly be pointing you, especially to PANA, for those kind of resources. And also, I don't know if it's still around, but ACX had a whole ACX University thing. They talked about performance. They talked about, how to meet their mastering standards and stuff like that. So, yeah, I guess that would be another resource.
I would have killed for ACX University when I first started. That came about 2 years too late for me. But yeah, like, oh my gosh, do I wish that had existed when I was starting and it could have just said explicitly what I needed to do to master my files. In 2016, those videos did not exist. You had to read their instructions and figure it the fuck out.
You were in the trenches.
Literally. Relating to ROI, by the way, I feel like we've hit on this a lot, and Shiromi, you shared this is something you love. I feel like, and I mean this in the least objectifying way possible. My biggest ROI has been having narrator friends. Like the amount of times that like an email comes into my inbox and I have questions, and I'm like, hey, Kirt, so like, or like, like texting somebody that you know who is going through something similar, has that experience, like that's huge. And hopefully your friends are free. But yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry I keep sending you
Oh my
invoices.
God.
Yeah.
I didn't want to say anything. But
Kurt's not a free friend, but everyone else. I'm gonna pay the big bucks to hang out with Kirt. Oh my gosh. But yeah, it's also like where earlier in my career, if I was like really nervous about an audition, I might try to book a session with a coach if I could get in with someone last minute just to be like, can you help me work through this and like do my best on it? And now that I've met narrator friends that I like love and respect, who are also very generous with me, I can like send them 2 takes of an audition and be like, which one do I send? Or whatever, just to get like that initial brief feedback, which is not the same as like a full coaching session on an audition, but like because also if my narrator friends want to send me their 2 audition takes and ask me to give them feedback, I'll do that too. Like it's an equal exchange, like alchemy.
That is such a different thing from the scenario that André described earlier, the friend who thinks they might be good at audiobooks and just wants to take you out for coffee. Like we have to acknowledge how different that is. Like peers helping peers is so valuable. And frankly, something this industry does so well. And let's keep doing that.
But my life has changed now that whenever somebody asks, I'm like, check out narratorsroadmap.com. What Karen Commons has done for the people, tremendous, unspeakable. She's saved so yeah, there we go. That's all.
And that was free for the longest time. And I think now it's very inexpensive.
And I think a lot of it is still available. Like there's an enormous amount of starting materials on the main page. And I'm like, she deserves the price of a coffee for the amount of resources she's put together.
She's not getting rich from that. Yeah. It's probably just paying the expense of the website. So like, it's not free, but it's certainly worth the tiny, tiny investment.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, it's been really, I've really enjoyed talking about this and thinking deeply about ROI when we're approaching coaching relationships. And just in terms of thinking about what is helpful for your business, for your art, for your growth, and not being afraid to like reach out to your friends and community to get recommendations or feedback. And I wish us all well as we like navigate this thorny path, but thorny but rewarding path on our way.
I would only add that like I hope that some of what we are doing here in this podcast is creating that sense of community and a group of peers that maybe we haven't met in real life, but don't be afraid to reach out if you have a simple question, or you're looking for advice. If you truly like, I sometimes think of myself as like living in this little island of Green Bay, Wisconsin, where nobody does what I do. If you're on an island, like send a carrier pigeon over my way. Yeah. Send something to my island if you need it. Because like that would have been so valuable to me at the start. But it took going to the events. I mean, talk about something that's not free. Going to New York
deeply
for a few days
unfree.
For a and those things have been super valuable. If you're on an island, send a message. We are your community.
Thank you again to our guest, Shiromi Arserio. And thank you for joining us at the Narrator Roundtable. If you want to join the conversation or send a carrier pigeon to our island, you can find us on social media or visit our website, narratorroundtable.com, to submit a question or topic of discussion for a future episode. What's on your mind? We want to talk about it.
The Narrator Roundtable is produced and hosted by André Santana, Deanna Anthony, Gail Shalan, Kirt Graves, and Lindsey Dorcus. All copyrighted material is shared with permission. Music and sound effects are licensed through Storyblocks Audio. All opinions shared are those of the individuals and do not reflect the positions or policies of any company or organization with which they happen to be associated.